Over the course of the next 7 evenings, this one included, we're going to be talking about these 4 myths. And they're called myths because they're like metaphors for understanding the spiritual life and understanding the sort of goal of the spiritual life and growth. And how we relate to enlightenment. So the goal of Buddhism is enlightenment. And these myths, they sort of, they help us to understand that approach. And, each sort of Buddhist tradition will probably emphasize one myth over the other. And also at different stages in our lives, one myth will be more sort of alive in our practice. So what we're doing over these next 7 weeks is we're going to talk, sort of explain what those myths are, but we're also going to talk about the sort of advantages and disadvantages of these myths because they are myths, they are like metaphors, so they're not literal. They're sort of like partial truths, they're not whole truths. And each myth will have advantages and disadvantages. So it's really, really good to know what the pitfalls are of each myth, because each myth's sort of pitfalls counters the other myths. These myths are sort of, they're sort of limited, and it's really good to know the pitfalls, the sort of disadvantages of each myth, so that we can be aware of them and so that we don't fall into them, because, it can also limit us when we're not aware of the pitfalls and when we sort of discount one myth, or even sometimes people could renounce the whole of the spiritual path actually because they've sort of invested too much in one myth and then they think it doesn't work. So tonight I'm going to be talking about the myth of self-transcendence, and actually next week Satchidasa is going to build on this myth of self-transcendence. So there's so much to say actually about each myth. We were laughing because Satchidasa was saying I'm going to say everything about it and he won't have anything to say next week, but actually there's so much to say about each myth. So I'll say a bit about what this myth is and what underpins this sort of myth, this metaphor for understanding the path. And actually the sort of one of the foundations of this myth is that there is a path, and that we sort of tread this path. So is the underpinning of this myth is that through my own efforts I can become a Buddha, I can become enlightened. So we make an effort to change our sort of limited, narrow consciousness, conditioned being, and through our own efforts we grow into Buddhahood. So it sort of starts with me here and the enlightened mind and our potential over there, and as we make effort, we step closer and closer to Buddhahood, and we become more and more like the Buddha. So it's a myth of growth, and it's a myth of self-power as well. And the emphasis in this myth is really on karma, on ethics. So when I say karma in the Buddhist concept, what I mean is that our actions have consequences. Our actions, what we think, what we remember, what we dwell upon, that is what we'll become. And what we think, how we conceive of the world shapes our world. It shapes how we talk, it shapes how we behave, and that in turn conditions our world. So this sense that the unconditioned is outside of us, and we grow towards it. So I was going to say a bit about the other myths. I wonder if I should say something about the other myths. the other myth of the myth of surrender would be seeing those Buddha-like qualities outside of yourself, but surrendering to them. So rather than making the effort to sort of move towards them, you surrender to them. And the myth of discovery would be seeing the enlightened mind, those the Buddhahood, as within you. So those Buddha-like qualities are within you, and you need to make effort to uncover them from within yourself. And then the myth of emergence would be that those Buddhahood is within you, and actually all you need to do is relax and let go of self-clinging to allow those Buddha-like qualities to emerge. So I just wanted to just sort of draw out those other myths, because it gives a bit more context to this first myth of self-transcendence. So yeah, the self-transcendence myth is that Buddhahood is outside of us, and through our own efforts we move towards it. So it's the sort of, it's the development model within the spiritual life. So in practice, what this looks like is us taking responsibility for our lives. It sort of says, this myth says that we can change, we can do something about our lives. It sort of empowers us actually as, moral agents. How we act will have an effect. And there's a clearly laid out path of practice. So meditate regularly. You've probably all been, advised to do that. If you're, to have a regular meditation practice. And to practice ethics. So, looking at your behaviour, looking at, what do you habitually dwell upon in your mind? How do you speak? How do you behave in the world? So, taking responsibility for our actions. And within this myth, there's an emphasis on looking at the conditions of our lives in order to grow. So we're moral agents and we can take responsibility for our actions. There's sort of like, maybe I'll come at it a different way. So there's internal conditions, so the conditions of our minds and our hearts. And then there's external conditions as well. So what situations do we put ourselves in? What conversations do we engage in? What was our work? What friendships do we keep? How do we communicate? So there's sort of a clearly laid out path of cultivating positive internal and external conditions, or maybe a better way to put it is more supportive conditions for growth. So within Triratna we have this path. What's emphasised in Triratna is this path of regular steps. So you meditate every day, and if you alternate your practices. So one day you do the metta bhavana, you cultivate loving kindness. The next day you do the mindfulness of breathing, and you alternate it like that to sort of start to build up a sort of whole sense, an integrated positive being. And then there's the path of creating supportive conditions, which I've talked about as well. So looking at your friendships, looking at your work, looking at where you live. And then there's the whole system of meditation which underpins this Buddhist tradition of Triratna, which is we become more integrated, we become more positive, we're receptive. And then through that part of ourselves could die, spiritual death, the parts that hold us back, we can let go of them, and then something new can come through. So it's spiritual death and spiritual rebirth. So that whole system is like a developmental model, and it operates within Triratna. A lot of the teachings that we teach here at the Buddhist Center, a lot of the structures that are in place within Triratna, they've grown out of those structures. And they're sort of, you can think of them as linear from like A to B, but you can also think of them as like a mandala, like a sort of a flower. One of the images that, I don't know if it was Subhuti or Maitrabandha was using, but it was the image of a cabbage, which I'm not really sure about this image of a cabbage. I don't know why. Actually, if you look at a cabbage, they are beautiful, aren't they?
they are aesthetically beautiful cabbages, so perhaps we would like to grow like a cabbage, but maybe it's just the associations of cabbage or the word cabbage. It doesn't sound very nice. Go on, Satchidasa.
But it all grows in, you know why
because it grows out. Yeah. So I know. Yeah. So this the image of the cabbage is do you know why? It's just imagining a patch of cabbages. Actually, it's quite beautiful, isn't it, to think of us all growing like cabbages. Anyway, so this I don't know how many times I can say cabbage in a few minutes, but there's an image of a cabbage because through this model or this myth, we grow in all directions. So, and that's one of the advantages of this model actually, is that we sort of we grow in all directions, and part of that is that we are building friendships and we are taking responsibility for our actions. So there are positive sort of ethical, moral and social consequences of that. So I'm just moving into the advantages of this myth now. So those are some key advantages actually of this myth, which is, it's really easy to see, isn't it? It's like through those structures of friendship and through the sort of the emphasis on friendship and on ethics, it has a positive effect on the individual and on the world. It has a consequence, a real sort of tangible consequence for the world and for us as individuals. And I think the other advantage is that it just gives us something to do. I really remember this when I came along to the Buddhist Centre. I was 25 and I'd done an art degree, and I'd been sort of really passionate about studying art since I was 15, and sort of it was really a deep practice for me. But once I graduated from university, I didn't really know what to do. There wasn't really a path laid out for me in terms of developing my arts practice. And there wasn't a community of people to be alongside me to do that. So I sort of left on my own, and actually I just couldn't really, I somehow couldn't really figure out what that path was on my own. So I think this model and this myth is really, really good, especially if we're new to practice, because it just gives us something to do. It gives us a structure, and that sort of holds us and supports us as well. And it's just really clear what the next step is, isn't it? Like starting a meditation practice, it's really clear. And then, we have these institutions like the London Buddhist Centre where everything's geared towards that to support individuals. And it's not just at the start, like now that I've been coming to the Buddhist Centre for 9 or 10 years, I still find those structures really, really supportive actually. And now that I'm ordained and I can teach meditation and I can befriend people, I also find that like a really, really supportive structure, a mode of practicing. So it sort of goes that this I don't think we need to sort of let go of this model once we're not beginners anymore. This developmental model, I think it can keep going. And that's the thing with all of these myths actually, is that they sort of you do find one within the other, and they can be alive at all times. But we'll say more about that as the weeks go on. So another sort of social consequence of this sort of cabbage image and growing out in all directions is that it's a really good counter to individuality. So we can't grow in isolation. We need to grow with each other and sort of for each other as well. So this model in its sort of the myth of this model, but also the structure of this model counters individuality. And I really, really noticed it when I first came along, because I don't know if other people are like this, but I'd have good friends, and I've got good friends now that I've had since I was a child. So it's not that there isn't continuity, but with some friends would come and go, and I think with some of those friendships, what would happen is we'd reach a point of not conflict, but where we'd start to rub up against each other a bit. The communication would get a bit difficult, or something would go unsaid, And rather than being in a situation which sort of forced us almost into a more deeper communication, a more direct communication, an honest communication, we just drift apart and lose touch. And it's sort of the blessing, and sometimes it feels like the curse of being in a community of practitioners where you're going to bump into each other again. If you come to the Buddhist Centre and you're committed to your practice, you can't just drift and sort of make a bigger orbit around people until they go off orbit and you never come back into orbit with people. We're all orbiting around the same sort of systems and structures, so we're going to come back into relationship with each other. And sometimes it's really painful in the moment, but I really, really value that, because it's meant that lots of my relationships have really, really deepened. And for me, working at the Buddhist Centre and living in community has been such a good container for that, because it's sort of held something, and then an inner alchemy starts to happen, because I can't escape. I remember that really clearly when I started working at the Buddhist Centre and living in community. I had this really deep feeling that there was no escape. I was being seen in all these different contexts, and I couldn't compartmentalise my life anymore, like be one person at home, one person at work, one person with my friends outside of those contexts. Everything started to come together, so all the different parts of me were coming together, and it was really, really excruciating, but it was ultimately really positive, and I sort of grew in spite of myself. And I think that's what's really good about this myth and this model, is that, we do grow in spite of ourselves, because there's a part of us, it's in everyone, which has a sort of deep resistance to going deeper, a deep resistance to change. But when we commit to something, and when we have external structures which hold us accountable, we sort of can't help but change. That's been my experience, so I've really appreciated those structures. Yeah, and another advantage of this myth is, I think, is that it does build faith in the law of karma. Seeing that our actions really, really do have consequences, and just doing the metta bhavana consistently and regularly, and putting people who we're in contact with in the metta bhavana builds faith in that as a practice. I've really, really noticed that myself, that I think the metta bhavana is such a rich and transformative practice. And when I've been having difficulties with people, and I've put them in the fourth stage of the metta bhavana, something's shifted. And it's not always immediate, and sometimes there needs to be a surrender as well. And I'll say a bit more about that in a moment, but I think that this model really does build confidence and faith in the sort of key and fundamental principles of Buddhism, of karma, of our actions having consequences, and I think that's really, really valuable. And it helps us to really value. It helps us to really value those practices and cherish those practices, and I think it also really helps us to value and cherish our teachers as well, the people that have taught us these practices and held these structures for us. And just lastly is that I think the developmental model, the self-transcendence model, it creates stability. So it creates stability for a bigger vision, a deeper vision to sort of unfold. I was thinking about this experience I had when I was on my first ordination retreat. So I was when you ask for ordination, you go to these places. There's a place for women and there's a place for men. The place for women is called Tirthanaloka, and it's in Wales, and it's this beautiful place in the middle of the Brecon Beacons. And near the retreat centre there's this really big reservoir. It's really, really beautiful, and you get the mountains on each side reflected in the reservoir, and it's just a wonderful place. And I was there for my first 2-week retreat, and I was having quite it's funny because I didn't really realise it at the time. I was having quite strong meditative experiences and sort of like visions, I suppose, in my meditation, but I didn't really notice that's what was happening. I noticed it, but I didn't really. Anyway, what happened was I had this sense that I needed to go to the reservoir to meet a Buddha figure. I don't know if I should tell this story, it's going to sound really weird. Okay, I'm just going to keep going. So I've started, I can't really leave it now. So yeah. So I had this sense that I was going to meet a Buddha. And there are these beautiful Buddhas, these 5 Buddhas, the Jinnas, and there's not time to go into them, but one of them is a blue Buddha and Akshobhya. And he's connected to the water, and there's something really still about Akshobhya. There's a depth to Akshobhya. Anyway, so I had this sense, and we did a puja each night, and in the puja I had this sense that I needed to get up early in the morning before morning meditation, so it would have been at about 6 a.m, and go to the reservoir because I was going to meet Akshobhya at the reservoir. So I just had this sense that's what I needed to do. So funny thinking about it now, because now I've got more of a context for this, but at the time I was like, okay, that's what needs to do. So I got up early, I jogged down to the reservoir. And when I got there, I was really confused because it was like really, really windy, and there was a wind sort of blowing across the reservoir, and like it was like it looked tidal, but it wasn't. There's just like waves, and it was just so alive and visceral and vibrant. But I had this feeling of like, oh no, hang on, this isn't Akshobhya. This isn't Akshobhya. And then suddenly there was like this sort of vision, and it wasn't really visual. It was like a felt sense of another Buddha rising out of the water. Amoghasiddhi, who's the Buddha of fearlessness, and he has this mudra where he just holds up his hands, and there was he's sort of the Buddha of the midnight forest, and as I was there, it was just really clear that was the Buddha I was meeting, and had such a strong sense of Amoghasiddhi. I remember chanting the mantra, and the wind like blowing across my face and chanting the mantra, just really feeling like I'd met this Buddha. And then I sort of did that, and then I just like jogged back to the retreat centre and just did the rest of the day. And I remember telling my group leader about this experience, and her just sort of sort of taking it seriously and also not taking it too seriously, you know. Anyway, I don't know why I'm telling this story now, but I think there's something about the significance and the beauty of these more sort of visionary, imaginative connections to the goal beyond us and something transcendental, and you know, different people will experience that in different ways. And that these models and these myths, what they're sort of pointing to is beyond any myth or any model. So, you know, what I was doing on that retreat was I was doing the metta bhavana, I was doing the mindfulness of breathing, we were talking about Buddhist ethics and putting them into context in our lives. And then from that experience, I had something which was outside of, from those practices, I had something happen which was really outside of those models of development. That sort of those sort of more, I don't know, it's not a visionary experience, I don't really know how to describe it, but those sort of like the experience of is that for me it's that suddenly something in life speaks to me which is beyond life and makes me feel deeply alive and deeply connected to life. It's imaginative, but it's deeply connecting, and there's a deep meaning in it as well. And it's those points in my practice which have really sort of kept practice alive, I think, and they've been the sort of driving force really in my practice. These more, something breaking through into my life from sort of a more imaginative realm. And when I say imagination, I don't mean like a sort of fanciful idea. I mean a sort of rich, embodied experience which is connected to these structures which I've been talking about. So somehow, these structures, these practices, this idea of moving closer towards Buddhahood, and then something breaking through which is beyond my limited mundane mind, which lifts me out of my experience and is exciting and terrifying at the same time. I was really afraid. It's like then it feels like an adventure. Then the spiritual life feels alive, and it feels like an adventure, and it feels like I'm stepping into something unknown. And I wanted to talk about that. Actually, it's becoming, as I speak, it's becoming more clear why I wanted to tell you that story, which is because I think one of the disadvantages of this developmental model is that it can get really dry. Like, my experience of the self-development does not appeal to me at all. Even though actually I like structure, and I've been quite sort of dutiful in following the structures. The idea of just like working on myself until I become a Buddha just seems like, oh geez, like, well, that's going to be lifetimes, which actually it probably is. But it just makes it feel like the goal and the enlightened mind is so far away from where I am. And we can perfect and practice. We can practice mindfulness and metta sort of infinitely, can't we? And never quite feel like we're reaching Buddhahood. And it can sort of put something. Well, it can put the goal. It can put the Buddhahood really far away from us, and sort of too far away from us. Yeah. I remember hearing about the wheel of life and the spiral path. So there's this like these classic symbols of the wheel of life. We're sort of stuck on the wheel and we go round and round and round, and there's like different stages of this wheel. And then at one point in the wheel, you can actually get off the wheel and go up the spiral path, and it starts with dukkha, feeling dukkha, and then it goes on to faith, and then joy, and then bliss, and then joy, rapture, concentration, bliss. Anyway, there's all these different stages going up. And I remember when people would talk about the wheel, I'd be really interested, like this wheel of life, which is really painful and habitual. And when they talk about the spiral, I'd completely switch off, because I just think, I'm really not, I don't even know where the exit point is. I mean, I know conceptually where the exit point is, but I very rarely find the exit point. So I'm not even going to worry about that spiral. I'm just focusing on the wheel and finding that little gap of escaping off the wheel. And actually now, as I look back, I think there really were moments where I did step off the wheel into the spiral, particularly in meditation, particularly when I was on retreat, and that's fine actually now that I look back. But I think the other disadvantage of this model is that we can overlook where we can overlook the good qualities that are already present, and that can play into feeling despondent and feeling despairing, and it can play into sort of low self-esteem. If we have a sense of low self-esteem, it can play into that. If we don't have low self-esteem actually, and we feel like we're really nailing the path, it can play into conceit, and then we can get overly confident and sort of feel intoxicated in our practice, and like nothing can touch us. And then we'll reach the end of this model, our self-will will run out, because it always does, and then we'll go into despair. We might even just leave the spiritual life because we feel like we've failed. So those are the disadvantages, some of the disadvantages of the myth. So I think sort of the key, I think one of the key disadvantages is sort of related to what I was saying, and this story about me sort of meeting this Buddha of fearlessness on that reservoir, is that we can get quite caught up in just cultivating positive emotion and integration of positive emotion, which is normally the sequence. And we lose that sort of spiritual death and spiritual rebirth experience, which is where we need that in order for true growth to actually happen. So we just get lost in refining ourselves and refining ourselves and refining ourselves, and we become healthy, happy human beings. We're ethical, we're aware, we're emotionally positive, we're robust, we're effective, we're kind, we take people in. We're having a really positive effect in our own lives and in other people's lives. So all of those things are really, really, really good. But the reason that we're doing all of this is because we want to see through that the duality of self and other. We want to break through into Buddhahood. Actually, we want that sort of self, the limited sense of self, to die. We want to let go of it in order for something else, something fresh, and something beyond our narrow sense of ourselves to come through. And one of the disadvantages of this model is that we get not lost in the refinement. I don't know what quite the right word is, but we sort of just we end with refinement, and we just keep refining. It's a bit like Maitreya Bandhi has this lovely image of the acorn growing into the oak tree, and that, the sense of ourselves now is the acorn and the oak tree is Buddhahood, and we just get stuck becoming a shinier, he says sexier acorn. I don't know if an acorn can be sexy, but I guess it's that sense of us, just like me, but like the best version of myself, the best version of me, rather than something completely beyond my sense of myself. And actually, and so we start, and in that sense we take things at their own value, and I just think it's such a shame. It's such a shame to see the world in those terms, just at their own value. We don't see we don't really look for the sort of emptiness or the true nature of things. And in that sense, the world isn't actually really alive to us. And I think as well, there's no space for sort of faith and reverence and something sacred, and also there's not a space necessarily for devotion. We need to acknowledge that. Well, I think in my practice, it's been really, really important in my life actually to revere something which is beyond me. And in this model, it's something which is outside of oneself. In these other models, it's something within oneself. But perhaps it's just my temperament. But I think it's been important to sort of revere something outside of myself, something beyond me and my limited sense of myself. That's given my life. Well, it's made me feel alive, actually. And it's interesting because when you get ordained, you get given a visualization practice. It's called we call it visualization practice, but the word for it is sadhana, which actually can be translated as a means to accomplishment. And in that meditation practice, we imagine a figure which embodies the qualities of the enlightened mind, and one of the sort of from a developmental approach, you could say that as you dwell on those qualities, you start to bring those qualities into being. So for the figure that I was given when I got ordained was White Tara. And she sits, it's a female figure, and she sits in cross-legged position, and she has one hand on her knee, and she has an eye in her hand, and she has another hand at her heart. And this is the mudra of generosity, and this is the mudra of protection. And she has eyes in her hands and eyes in her feet, and she has an eye in the centre of her forehead and eyes in the usual place as well. So, and in a way you could dwell upon that and think for yourself, well, what does that mean to have eyes in your hands and eyes in your feet? And what does it mean for a figure to sit perfectly still? And she's the colour white. She's like pure white, it said, like when sunlight hits snow. And she has an aura behind her, which is like the autumn moon. And sometimes it said it's like 1,000 moons. So she's this sort of still figure that radiates moonlight. And so in the sadhana, you can imagine white Tara in front of you, and you also, as you imagine white Tara in front of you, you also become Tara. So there's this sort of, the qualities are outside of oneself and they're inside of oneself. And it's like the more I dwell with Tara, the more I become like Tara, the more she sort of is within me and outside of me. And then in a way that the more I practice that meditation practice, the more the boundary dissolves between us. So, so this myth, it is a model, and even this practice of sadhana can be approached from a sort of self-transcendence metaphor. So I visualise white Tara. Or you might be doing the mindfulness of breathing practice. Doing the mindfulness of breathing practice, we get closer and closer to the breath. And then sometimes you might have had this experience where the boundaries dissolve between you and the breath. And then it becomes really mysterious, like you sort of lose that sense of yourself in a positive sense. There's no difference between you and the breath. So there's something quite mysterious which starts to come into our experience. So these this model is a model of self-development, and it emphasises self-power and growth, and that Buddhahood's outside of us and that we step towards it. But along the way, we will also have like flashes of something which is immediate, and reality being like really present and immediate in our experience. And we don't want to discount those experiences. And so within this model, what am I trying to say? So there is the model of self-development, and within that model we'll experience other myths, other metaphors, other models. And I guess, our goal, our idea of where we're going, so enlightenment, Buddhahood, it's mysterious, and usually, even if we're just doing the path of regular steps, meditating regularly, building friendship, working on our communication, what breaks through into our lives isn't what we expect. And you will all have had that experience before. The way that growth happens, the way that we grow in all directions is really, really mysterious. It's not usually what we expect. And in my experience, I've had to reach the edges of this self-development model, and then actually surrenders had to come in. I think self-will can only take us so far, and then we realise that actually we can't control everything, that we sort of can't do it all on our own, and then some kind of surrender has to happen. Maybe I'll just end actually with this last story, which was when I got ordained and I got given this white Tara visualization. I was doing the practice really, really dutifully. Every day, for a particular amount of time, really systematically. And it was sort of like working. I was like getting concentrated. I was feeling really connected. The visualization was feeling really alive. And then for a few weeks, it wasn't working. I don't know if you've probably all experienced this with meditation. It's like you get into a groove with a particular way of doing the metta bhavana or the mindfulness of breathing, and it's like, I've cracked it. I just need to keep doing this, and then like I'm just going to keep making progress. And then you reach the sort of end of that particular way of approaching a practice, and that's what happened to me with this visualization practice. And I got so frustrated, and I sort of got into such despair. And I had this beautiful plaster rupa, I think it was plaster or resin, and I was like so angry that I wanted to smash the rupa, because I was really angry with white Tara. I just wanted to smash. I was like, something has to die. I'm going to smash my rupa. So so I got the rupa and I picked it up and I threw it as hard as I could against my wall, and it just didn't even break. And I was like, oh damn. So I did it again. Anyway, I ended up breaking the rupa. And actually, I've glued it back together now. It was on my shrine in pieces, and it was really, really powerful actually to sit with this broken rupa. I mean, I really wouldn't recommend smashing rupas. It's in Tibetan Buddhist, there's probably some traditions that would see that, it's really a terrible thing to do. I remember telling Surya Gupta, she was like, "Oh, you broke a rupa," but actually, I think that was me reaching the edge of this myth of self-transcendence and self-development. Like, I'd been putting in all the effort, and then I just felt like it wasn't working anymore, and something had to break, and I did need to sort of surrender to something. So I guess what I was going to say is that there is an emphasis on striving, and striving is really important, and we'll reach the edges of that, but it doesn't mean I still do the white Tara sadhana, I still do it really systematically. It doesn't mean actually that I'm not that doesn't work. It's just that I've reached the edges of that particular mode, and something new has to come in. And then how I practice it's not so willful, and it's much more receptive, but I'm still there are elements of the developmental model within that, and the self-transcendence model within that. Yeah, so basically these myths and these metaphors, they balance each other out, and we need to know what the sort of pitfalls of them are, and we need to know what they are in order to probably before we get to the stage where we're smashing rupas, bring in a bit of surrender. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to leave it there. Next week, Satchidas is going to unpack this myth more and say more about the myth. But I'm going to leave it there and hand back to Satchidasa.
Thank you very much, Garavavati. Thank you for telling us very clearly all the upside and the downside of this way of seeing things, but also particularly you really brought the expression you used was the inner alchemy of spiritual practice, and I really felt that coming through, and a lovely sense that was very grounded and imaginative, and I enjoyed your sharing. So thank you for sharing some experiences which are not easy to share at the best of times, and not on YouTube either. Thank you very much. That was great. So we'll have a break. I just want to say I was talking about YouTube earlier, and this is on YouTube now, as you know. We want to get some more subscribers, and we have about 9,500. If you haven't subscribed, please could you subscribe if you just haven't you just haven't really remembered to do that. But if you want to share tonight's talk or any other talk with a friend or a family member, please do. I was saying earlier that I found a hamster online who has 3.5 million subscribers. Very cute hamster, gets through lots of little loopy tricks really well. And it wasn't too bad, and I kind of understand that because I like dogs and dog videos. My thing is boxer dogs, dog reunions. I'm a sucker for any of that kind of thing. I just give myself away. Then I looked and I found a gerbil that has more subscribers than the London Buddhist Centre. And at that point, I started to feel a bit miffed, actually. I thought, I think we're probably worth more than a gerbil. Maybe not a hamster, though. But we're in that territory. So if you could share and subscribe, and hopefully we can build up more and more people to subscribe, which gets more and more people to watch. Because what we're talking about here with these myths is really, myth is a word that often, people just take to mean unreal, but that obviously isn't what we're talking about here. We're talking about really the fundamental notion that there is a spiritual path, which is pretty extraordinary in the scheme of things. It certainly was to me. It wasn't something that was ever even really explained to me in any sense as I grew up. And there'll be many people for whom coming across a spiritual path and starting to live that life, or at least being given a vision of that, even in whatever level, it might be just a small thing, it can be completely transforming for people, as it has been to everybody you've seen giving talks over the course of the last year online. If you can help us by giving money to support that project, you're giving money to that happening more and more. Be very grateful, and Britta's going to post the link to our giving page. So yeah, please share the YouTube channel, and please do give if you can.